with a whole lot of truth. Remedy Revolution is here for you. Ooh. And now here's your host, Aaron Page.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Remedy Revolution podcast. My name is Aaron, and today's guest, I had the pleasure of joining him on his podcast, Autism Parenting Secrets. And it was a great time. I decided that I would love to bring his expertise to my show as well. I am pleased to welcome Len Arcuri to the Remedy Revolution podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So, Len, tell us a little bit about you and what started you off on this journey.
Sure. Well, I guess right now, to fast forward to the current time period, I'm a strategic parenting advisor. I work with parents who are making high stakes decisions for their child with complex challenges, autism being only one of them. And it's really about helping them operate at a higher level so that everything they do, their decision making, everything works more effectively. And again, I have this concept that the parent is the force multiplier for their child. So that's what I'm all about now, working one-on-one with parents. And the podcast is a way of sharing powerful insights from people like you that are just really valuable things for parents to know earlier in the journey. And it's called Autism Parenting Secrets. I'm going to shift the name of it because it's really not just about autism. Because again, as you know, whatever label we give to however our child's presenting, the key is really addressing the root causes. And those root causes are many, and there's lots of things out there, and they may manifest differently. So it's not about a particular diagnosis. So
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say that most of us don't come here by choice. We come here for various reasons, but typically because someone we know and love has some kind of neurodevelopmental disorder, autism, PANS, PANDAS, ADHD, OCD, anxiety, all of the above. So tell us a little bit about your journey and what brought you to the autism world.
sure, yeah. Well, again, none of us come, voluntarily. So I think similar to you, my son is now 19, so he's had quite the journey. His name's Rye, and he basically was diagnosed moderate borderline severe autism around the 18-month mark. And we saw huge signs, after his around 12, 13 months that there were significant issues. And I could bore you with a lot of the play-by-play of his whole journey, but the executive summary is he had a ridiculously overloaded immune system for a lot of reasons. And basically, there was a tipping point for him where his immune system just crashed, a combination of toxic load from a variety of sources. And also, he tasted peanut butter for the first time. And that's how we found out he was anaphylactic to peanuts and soy. Those are life-threatening allergies for him. So we rushed him to the emergency room. He came out of it. But basically, that combined with just, again, an overload on his immune system, everything just crashed. And it was really the MMR vaccination that was the tipping point that kind of pushed him over the edge. I don't look back on it and say that that caused autism or anything of that nature. I just really subscribe to the total load theory that there were a lot of stressors, and that was just basically the tipping point for him. So basically his whole system crashed. He became allergic to everything he ate and was effectively failure to thrive. He went from like 90th percentile in weight to like 11th percentile. And really nothing we tried, my wife Cass and I, nothing we tried was working. And we were getting advice from a lot of real expensive practitioners in New York City where we were living at the time. And really because of my wife Cass and her looking at the different options and not leaving any stone unturned, she was the first one who suggested homeopathy as something that could help him, because basically medications went in him and came out the other end. Like nothing was processed, nothing was digested, nothing was helping him. And so the homeopathic route was something I easily dismissed. And again, I'm going to keep this high level, but basically we found a homeopath in New York City, who then found a homeopath who was in Haiti at the time, who basically created a remedy of the MMR vaccine, which 18 years ago was very rare, and they weren't on the shelves for us to buy. So a remedy was made for him based on the MMR vaccine, and literally his health turned around the following day. The following day was the big beginning of the uptick for him, where he started to be able to digest food. He gained his weight back, and he had a few words that he had lost, and basically I was convinced he would never speak. And so his turnaround has been phenomenal, and there is absolutely no doubt that homeopathy was a key, if not the key part of his turnaround. So
Well,
now
you know, I love to hear that story.
yeah, he's 19 now. He's a happy, connected kid. He's quirky, but literally the boy who I thought would never talk talks more than anyone I know. And I had heard other parents talking about that at a DAN conference, an autism conference, and I was offended when someone said my son talks too much, because when you're a parent of a child who can't speak, all you want is that language, and you don't take it for granted. And I don't take it for granted now. I just say that because so much is possible for these kids, particularly, who are challenged with being on the autism spectrum and who are nonverbal or have other challenges. Again, if parents can focus on the right things, the toxins, the stressors, what's really behind how they're presenting, and if they explore options that are less traveled but potentially more effective, it's incredible how much a parent can influence and just ultimately make better decisions. And that's why I left my corporate career to do this full time, because none of us are taught how to make decisions, like how to navigate well. There's plenty of people want to give you advice on what to do. I'm not one of them. I'm all about how the parent's navigating. If a parent's overwhelmed, help them get more regulated and to get momentum. And for the strong parents, they can become unstoppable if they focus on how they're navigating and how they're making decisions.
Yeah, so I want to kind of break that down because so many parents are, especially parents from our generation. To be honest, were essentially given a diagnosis and a slap on the rear, and like, escorted out, and good luck. So at this point now, what are the primary challenges that parents are facing when they receive a new diagnosis for, say, an 18-month-old, or in my case, my son was a little bit older, about 4.5. What kinds of challenges are they facing from, the day-to-day perspective, and how do you help them overcome those?
Yeah, well, it's funny. The challenges they're facing are the same challenges that you and I faced going back a couple decades. You're basically given a diagnosis, not given much hope, if any, and basically you're pushed in a direction of this hamster wheel that's all about assessing your child based on the number of symptoms they're exhibiting to get a diagnosis for purposes of then getting services and therapies that help you cope or manage those symptoms. There's nothing about the root cause. So I think a big way or a big shift for a parent to make is to say no to that. I mean, sure, you can say yes to services if they're provided and do all that. But I think the key is to make sure that some of your time, energy, money is being devoted to addressing the root causes behind what's going on with your child. And I think that's what most people miss, is that root cause approach, which I know sounds obvious, especially if you know functional medicine. But I think most parents who have a child with complex challenges don't sincerely address and focus on the root causes. It's easier to just to focus on the symptoms. Very few parents work on themselves. And again, that's a huge missed opportunity. And I also think that very few parents, and again, I say all this not from a place of arrogance. I made all the mistakes, which is why I'm screaming from the rooftops that the key is a parent actually having a strategy for their child. And that may sound obvious also, but I didn't have a strategy early on. I just had a whole collection of interventions and things my wife and I were choosing to do. And we had the means to be able to kind of throw the kitchen sink at my son to see what worked. And of course, that strategy is a horrible one. And that's not the right way to approach it. So I think, yeah, the missing component is a strategy. And when I say a strategy, that means having a good guess on the two or three root causes that are the right ones to focus on now for your child, because the sequencing really matters. and then bringing your A game to address those well, which means forming the right team, having the right practitioners, and it means just focusing. And that's where it's easy to get spread too thin. And now the other thing that's the big danger, 20 years ago, the trap I fell in was just waiting for that one practitioner to tell me what to do because I didn't feel qualified. And I was kind of abdicating my decision making to whoever the guru was at the time that we were working with. And now I see that that's still a problem. But the bigger problem is parents surrendering their decision making to AI, to chatbots. And that's, chat AI is phenomenal in terms of what you can learn and what you can, piece together, but it does not replace the decision making, which, as you know, comes down to your lived experience, your sense of responsibility, and your intuition. And that can't be kicked to the curb. That's the parent's greatest gift, especially for their child.
Yeah, I mean, so much of what I do is driven by intuition, and that was really at the heart of every decision that I made along the way. Now, that's not to say that, we weren't trying. You get to a place of desperation, and I think from desperation, you often make very poor decisions because, you'll try anything. And it feels like this invisible clock is like, on double time, right? So you get to this place of feeling like you have to do everything and you have to do it now. And unfortunately, the lack of a method in order to go through the various treatments, or whether it's improving yourself and your communication with your child, for example, those kinds of things fall by the wayside when you're in that mode of desperation. So, would you call yourself a coach then?
I call myself a strategic parenting advisor, and
Okay.
it's because coaching tends to be more the advice giving category. And again, there's a place for, there is a huge opportunity to help parents. I know you're doing what you're called to do. I'm doing what I called to do. So there's a place for all kinds of advisors and people, practitioners. But yeah, for me, it is absolutely, and I know all parents, most parents are like where I just want someone to tell me what to do. And I feel like the key is to step into that version of yourself that can discern what's the right call. So it's much less about what helped my son, because again, I feel very confident now and with hindsight that I know a lot and that I know the mistakes I made, I know what I would do differently. But that still doesn't mean that my opinion of what a parent should do in a situation should ever trump their own sense. But the reality, you hit it on the head. If you're exhausted and you're running on fumes and you're stressed and anxious, nobody can make good decisions in that state. So that's why, yes, part of what I do as an advisor is I help the parents see what they can't see, including if they're neglecting their own self-care. That's not a strategy. That's not okay. So that's why for me it's much more advisory, but the term coach tends to be something that's more like, okay, let's see what's going on. Here's what you should do. And I really push against that because it's much more about how a parent's making decisions. And that's why even you heard my story. I don't tell every client that I or every parent that I advise that they must do homeopathy. That may not be the most relevant or the biggest move for their family. So I try to take my own biases out of it and just help a parent to give them the tools to be able to see more clearly what's going on with their child, forgetting about the diagnosis. And that's why for many people I advise, what's coming up more and more is PANS and PANDAS. So, okay, I help them identify that's a potential root cause. Is that one of your top ones? Maybe top two or three right now? Do you have evidence of that? Do you sense that? And if that's true, then I can pull out my Rolodex and say, okay, well, Erin does this. She specializes particularly with respect to homeopathy. Then I can share the resources that might be relevant for that parent. But it's not about me starting off as a coach saying, okay, here's the doctor you should work with. So I feel like it must always start and end with the parent being in that position of authority. And I just want to help them grow into that and really to ultimately run on all cylinders because it all comes down to the decision making we're doing for our child. And anything a parent can do to kick to the curb anything that's getting in the way of that decision making is what I specialize in helping them achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. So often, I think parents then find themselves in these sticky situations, like whether it's, a parent or a grandparent or a spouse that doesn't seem to be on board with, what the other parent would like to do. How do you navigate those things? And is there any advice you can give to a parent who might be in one of those scenarios?
Yeah, we could probably have an entire episode on that, but I think ultimately the simple bottom line message is you get to decide who's in your circle of influence. So if that means kicking out family members, friends, ultimately you want people around you who are supporting you, who are encouraging, who want the best for you. And it's a hard pill to swallow, but a lot of people in our environment don't want the best for us. So to be very careful who's in that circle. That's super important. Now, if it's two parents, mom and dad, and they're at odds or they don't see things the same way, and there's friction there that clearly can get in the way of decision making, that is something that I focus on because I find that parents, without exception, want the best for their child. They truly are doing the best they can based on their beliefs and their operating system. And so ultimately, I don't pretend to be a marital therapist. I don't do that, and I don't in any way step into that lane. But it's not very difficult to get a mom and a dad more aligned and on the same page. And a lot of it has to do with kind of like a truce or a surrender, because I think many times parents show up and instead of focusing on let's figure out what's right for our child, it's more about each parent trying to win, like trying to get their views, to get their way, basically, if they see things differently. So, I can help parents shift out of that. And if parents are both on the same side of the table looking at what's going on with their child, they'll find there's more areas of overlap where they do agree and more of an opportunity to have honest dialogues about where they do disagree. And that's where sometimes having a third party like myself can bridge that gap because sometimes we can't hear things from our spouse. We're just too close. So there's definitely ways parents can get more aligned. And hey, if they need marital support, they should go and do that. If they need, therapy for themselves, they should do that. I just find most of what created the friction for me personally were these lousy stories I was telling myself about my child, about myself, or about autism. And I know firsthand you can reprogram yourself and just take an enormous amount of weight out of your backpack by just becoming aware of what you're believing, what your stories are. And even though you've held a belief that's really kind of maybe made sense when you were young, but now as an adult it doesn't serve you. All you need is that awareness, and you can shift immediately. But most of us aren't aware of our stories, so that's a big part of how I work one-on-one with parents. And if they can kick to the curb those stories and upgrade it to something that's actually supportive and more true, again, they then start operating as a totally different person.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, um, I think it's a tough pill to swallow for a lot of parents, but there is a very high divorce rate in the autism world, in the world of special needs in general. And I don't think that gets talked about enough. So often, parents are under tremendous amounts of stress, financially, emotionally, and really in every way possible. And so anything that any provider can do to assist those parents in lightening that load, and giving them supportive guidance, I think is incredibly beneficial. If you're new to a diagnosis, I think, that can be incredibly damaging to, the relationship between you and your spouse, because everything becomes about the child and what's best for the child. And, marriages get neglected not by choice, but because, we go into survival mode. So I think that's hugely important. And I'm glad that there are people like yourself, Len, who are addressing those kinds of tough conversations.
Yep. No, I appreciate that. And again, I everything you just mentioned, I check every box, and that's why this is not something where I'm like, hey, this was easy. Let me show you how. It's all learned experience of what works, what doesn't, and yes, the impact on marriages, the impact financially, and you didn't mention it, but I know it's a gigantic one. Is the impact that parents have with the other children they may have who may feel neglected because at least with autism spectrum disorder and with my son, all the attention was on him and not on my daughter, and there's real consequences. So I think what I can confidently share is you can navigate a complex challenge for your child without neglecting those other important relationships. You can navigate it without breaking the bank and doing things smartly, right? And with more focus and precision. And again, all those things, if we think about like how challenging the journey might be for a parent, because we're all programmed to fail, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, we all come with a wiring. I mean, the way I was parented and how I kind of entered adulthood, I couldn't use that playbook to make good decisions for my son or my daughter. I had to burn that playbook and shift. And so again, there's so much that's cutting against us, the way we're programmed and how so many other people want to take your authority away now with decision making, that again, you can step into that much stronger version of yourself. And again, it comes down to you allowing yourself to be that decision maker in chief. Because again, there's lots of forces that are working against you. But most of what's creating stress and anxiety, if not all of it, you have the ability to do something about that. You can't change what's happening directly with your child, the diagnosis, whether they speak or not. We wish we can control it. We can't, but we can heavily influence it. And that's why how the parents making decisions, it's just such an overlooked area. And it is the force multiplier if you step into that role. And not every parent wants to. I didn't want to. I wanted someone to tell me what to do. And I definitely didn't see this early on. And that's why I just have the podcast and this one on one way of working with parents. Because if they can seize this opportunity, so much more becomes possible for their child, themselves, and their family.
Hmm. Okay, so let's talk about some of the financial choices that parents face, and where it becomes important to really consider whether or not a treatment or a test or something like that. This is something that I talk about a lot, is that oftentimes people will sink all of their money into testing, for example, and then
Yep.
have no money left for any kind of treatment. So is that something that you've encountered as well?
Absolutely, because that's another. You can make one of two mistakes. You could do no testing and then have no data, or have way too much. I can't tell you how many PDFs I have, and how much money went into those, and then we never really acted on what came out of those. So I think the key is being very discerning. What are you testing for? Are you using the right company, the right testing method, and just not ever committing any money to a test unless you commit to taking action from it. I mean, it sounds so obvious, but yeah, you don't need a lot of tests. Generally speaking, at least in the space, you know, I don't specialize in, but I know the autism spectrum disorder space pretty well. It's very useful to have a urine test, a stool test, some blood tests, to have some of those to see what they see. And then I also think, having some kind of functional genomic information about your DNA blueprint, these are pretty standard. And especially if money's tight, then some of those you might be able to run through a Quest or a LabCorp. It's just that usually the standard testing companies, they have such ridiculously wide ranges. They'll say everything's fine when it maybe isn't. But no, I think you could be very discerning with a few tests to give you the right information, and do no more. Like you don't get bonus points for throwing too much in the. So I'm glad you brought it up because that is also another trap. So I think it's just about being discerning, and that's where having a good medical practitioner or other alternative practitioners who can advise you with that based on how your child's presenting. But more is not necessarily better.
Yeah, absolutely. It's something that has really bothered me about the practitioner community in general is that, the vast majority of practitioners are advising patients to go ahead and do a large battery of tests. And it's not that I think that all tests are bad, like you said. I mean, I think the data is in some cases invaluable. But, what is necessary to begin treatment and how much money do we have to allocate to testing and still have money left over to be able to implement the treatment involved? So, yeah, I think that's a massive trap that a lot of parents are falling into these days. Okay, how about I know in this community there's a lot of shaming from the medical community that goes on. For example, parents that come in, particularly in my world with pans and pandas, I can't tell you how many times I hear that medical practitioners told them that they were bad parents, permissive parents. They were, it was all their fault, and that they should just institutionalize their child, like all of these kinds of very harmful narratives. There's conversations that happen in front of children that, in my opinion, should never occur in front of the child when you're talking about something that they just can't control. So, talk to me about how you advise parents to navigate through some of those difficult interactions within the medical world.
Okay, well, let me start with just the last thing you said with the child. The best advice I ever received, that my wife Cass and I received, was from a therapist who whispered in our ear, when my son was young, don't ever say anything about your son that you wouldn't want him to know, right?
Right.
Because he was nonverbal. He showed no sign that he understood what was going on at all. And now he reminds me of things that we said before we got that message. So yeah, assume competence, assume your child's taking it all in. I can guarantee you they are, even if they don't show it. But when it comes to what you mentioned with practitioners, again, this is just such a basic concept, and I feel embarrassed I missed it early on. But no, if you have a practitioner who's saying that, who's shaming you, who's giving you no hope, who's discounting your role, you fire them immediately. And that's why who gets to be on the team? It's not who is on it, who gets to be on the team. And that's where there's qualities of a practitioner, including things like openness, curiosity. Those are much more important than the degree that's hanging on the wall. And so, really being discerning with who gets to be on the team, and for anyone like that, and there's plenty of them out there. We had the top neurologist in New York City who, was like, oh, at least he got a smart one when talking about my son, because he showed he can do cognitively things even though he was so impaired in so many ways. So there's a dismissiveness. My wife and I were told to get therapy ourselves because we're going to have to manage with this. And again, we both responded saying, no, we know that there's more is possible, and we're not going to just sit on our hands. So I think the overall advice is get clear on who's a fit and who's not a fit. And especially now, you don't have to have a practitioner who's 20 minutes away. You can work with practitioners across the globe, even. So, discerning what are those qualities you're looking for in a medical doctor, a pediatrician, and other practitioners, getting clear on what you want first and then evaluating the options is a power move. And again, I've developed tools to help people do this because it sometimes is very confusing. But going back to what you said about testing, for example, and again, I'm not going to use any names, but there could be a really credentialed functional medicine type pediatrician who is very well known in the, let's say, the autism community, who basically has the same exact protocol that they had 20 years ago, the same rigorous testing, all the same tests. Nothing's moved in 20 years. Well, it's not that that person's wrong. It's just that that's what they know. and that's what they offer. And for me, when it comes time for what person do I want to work with, I want someone who's a little bit more current and maybe has shifted and modified their approach and improved it over time. So, with the right questions, you can discern for the practitioner you're evaluating whether they have those qualities you're looking for. And I'm definitely looking for somebody who adapts and modifies. Because, like I said, with the testing, yeah, you want a stool test and a urine test. Okay, well, an organic acids test is one of the primary urine tests that people have been using for decades, but it's not the only one. It could be a useful one. There's many more. So you want a practitioner who understands the current landscape and can, again, not just use the same protocol they had in place 20 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Kind of coupled with that is there's a lot of practitioners that are very protocol intensive. And I think what happens a lot of times is people go into a new practitioner's office expecting miracles, to be frank, and they're expecting that this, very extensive protocol and very expensive protocol is going to completely turn their child around. And oftentimes, one of the things that I've found is that so many parents, when it comes time to administer that protocol, they realize they don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that. There are some practitioners who will give a laundry list of supplements that are designed to be taken 5 times a day, for example. So, and maybe this is a 5-year old. I mean, I had this happen with my son when he was, I think, 6 years old. We went to this practitioner who advised us on a number of supplements, and I'm sure they would have helped him, but he was 6 years old, and I could not get him to swallow 20 pills twice a day. Like that wasn't that wasn't
Right.
going to happen. And so I think we need to be understanding with parents and patients that sometimes the protocols need to be shifted to fit that particular patient. And as parents, I think you need to understand what the boundaries are for your family, for your child, and see if you can't help administer something that might be a little bit more uh, simplistic to be able to achieve the same results so that you're not throwing boatloads of money. I mean, we all have those of us in the biomedical world have like closets full of what we call supplement graveyards. It's just like
Right, right,
tons
right.
and tons and tons of things that we've spent you know thousands and thousands of dollars on that never gets used because for whatever reason. So I think that's important too, is that a lot of times parents can get incredibly overwhelmed by all of these protocols, and something to take into consideration, and I'm sure this is something you're dealing with, but you can clarify if not, but is to understand what is right for your family as far as implementation. If you're not going to be able to give 20 pills a day, then, maybe it's time to see a different practitioner who's going to recommend something that is feasible for your family.
Yep. And everything you said is, yeah, very familiar to me. And you want a practitioner who's flexible. Now, if you have someone who's it's this way or the highway, it's these tests and it's going to lead to these supplements, if they're very dogmatic, if you can ask questions of their staff or even before you start with them to get clear on what's going to be expected. And if you do, then you can kind of rule people out if you don't like what you're hearing. So that's where we can, before we start working with a practitioner with the right questions, understand what the road looks like so we can not go down that road. But ultimately, I think not that many practitioners are that autocratic, but you want to make sure you have someone who's willing to go slow, to kind of, build up, and really it comes down to you want a practitioner who actually cares what you think. And not all of them do. And again, these are not horrible people. They just have something that they feel helps more questions and more input for the parent they feel gets in the way, and so they don't really respect what the parent, and I would say that that's somebody who is not a fit for me. they They don't have to sit there and hear me talk to them for 2 hours about what I learned on the internet. But if I have a strong view, my wife has a strong preference, they should care about what we have to say, or if we're sharing what's happening with our son. And it's amazing. Many practitioners don't. They don't have enough time with you to hear what you have to say. And so that's where you may have to pay a little more out of pocket for someone who's not in, kind of in the network, because you want somebody who has the time with you to be able to understand what's happening, because otherwise there's no question you're going to get the one size fits all approach, which we can all hold hands and agree that the one size fits all approach for our kids is never the solution. It's never going to get you there.
Yeah. So one of the things, and I'm sure you did the same, that I did was I used to stay up every night and, go down some PubMed rabbit hole and read as much as I possibly could and try to figure out, pull on any kind of thread that might assist in helping with my son. And so I think in today's era, we have much more accessibility to information, albeit sometimes it is either far too filtered or not filtered enough when it comes to AI. Um, but then, how do you suggest parents educate themselves so that they are educated but not inundated with so much information that they become overwhelmed?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think the research piece of this, and especially now again with AI, there's so much more that you can do. But again, how much is too much? And it's easy to go down that rabbit hole and just to all you do is research and staying up at night. I know I was in that mode even 20 years ago before AI, just with the internet. So I think what might be helpful is for parents to realize that ultimately this comes down to taking action. And the only person, and the person who's going to determine what actions is you. And so sometimes those actions, as Aaron, I'm sure you know, are not convenient, are not fun. People won't be cheering you on, but it comes down to action. And if you're only spending your time researching constantly, it may be well intentioned, but it also could be you just distracting yourself away from the actions that are needed, the hard conversation that's needed with a practitioner or with a therapist or with a school, or making a guess on what root causes to focus on, and doing things that again people won't be cheering you on, they won't understand it. So I think the research piece, yes, we need to do that, but just be aware that if it's excessive, it could just be you distracting yourself away from the actions that really will move the needle. More research may not necessarily move the needle for your child, but you taking action and being equipped to take those actions and doing it consistently and doing it well. Because you talked about with practitioners, sometimes you spend all this money on the visits and all the labs, and then a couple months in, you're like, I can't afford to do all this. And so again, you with the right research and the right questions, you can make sure that you're working with practitioners who are a fit for what you are looking for. And whatever comes out of it, that you're in a position to take consistent action long enough to enable it to help your child. Because we all give up sometimes too quickly. Um, and the opposite's also true. Sometimes we don't course correct rapidly enough. So there's a sweet spot or an art of knowing when to continue and be persistent and when to say, okay, we need to change directions. And that's why all of that is so hard to do in isolation. And that's why the podcast I have is meant to share a lot of those insights. And there's nothing more powerful than having somebody walking alongside of you, kind of almost like a caddy. And I know it's not the best ref, but like a caddy, doesn't take the shot, but is reminding the golfer of what he may need to know. And if the golfer pulls out a club and the caddy sees that, do you really want to use that club? You might want to use this club. I mean, that's what elite golfers do, because they value that kind of guidance, and it's situational and it's fluid. And that's again where I feel like I wish I had someone like that early on, but I probably too early on wouldn't have thought I needed it. So it's kind of it's interesting. It's support that makes all the difference, but not something we're usually focused on because we're usually just focused on our child, not ourselves.
Yeah, I know early on, I felt so incredibly isolated, especially amongst friends and family members. Um, and so I reached out and created a Facebook community. And I think that that was an incredibly important part of my journey, which was connecting with other families, with other moms who were dealing with the same scenarios that I was, who were, going to some of these other practitioners. And I could ask, okay, well, what those kinds of questions, like what kinds of treatments are they suggesting? What kinds of testing are they doing? Though it became like a think tank where we could get some of those preliminary questions answered to decide if this was going to be the right fit. And so I do think community is hugely important. And so what you're doing with the podcast is creating a kind of community, albeit, it's a one-sided conversation. But then I think, you end up doing that, you know, more one-on-one work with parents and creating this situation where they don't feel like they're making that decision uninformed, right? They are given information and encouraged to act on that information in whatever way they feel is appropriate. So I think it's very important that we have other parents who have, you know, been through this baptism by fire, as I call it,
Hmm.
and are on the other side for the most part, and ready to assist other parents. Tell me a little bit about what that's like for you as a parent now, watching other parents going through this, because I'm sure it must take, an emotional toll on you as well.
Uh, yeah, actually, I would say it doesn't take an emotional toll on me. I'm honored to be able to play this role. And I guess going back to what you were saying about um, parent support and community, that is important. And parents, Facebook group support sites can be useful, and I'm sure yours was. But I found most of those parent support groups online were anything but helpful because in many cases, it's a lot of people feeling sorry with each other and a lot of fighting back and forth and parents shaming other parents or so overall community can absolutely be helpful. Parents got other parents' lived experiences can be helpful. Not all of it. So that's where again it's like curate who's in your atmosphere, and some of those parent support groups can be dynamite, but otherwise I just can choose wisely, and um, and so I think when it comes to learning from other parents, don't be overly influenced by someone else's success story or someone else's disaster story, right? Because again, what worked for one parent or didn't work for has nothing to do with what might be most useful for you and your child. So I think the key word you used was, we talked about intuition, and that's so related to homeopathy. The key phrase I love to use is informed intuition
Hmm.
because my intuition early on would have been way off because I didn't, I wasn't educated enough. So this whole concept that we're talking about is really about heightened leadership or more powerful leadership on the part of the parent. And there's five phases of that, and it starts with heightened awareness, which is understanding more, and there's phases that come out of it, and we can get tripped up in any one of those. And that's where, yes, guidance from other parents and support groups could be useful, but just never lose sight of the fact that it all comes down to you. And if you feel that urge to defer to anyone else, resist that urge because a more informed version of you to discern where to focus for your child, that is how you accelerate progress.
Yeah, so tell me, I know that you have used the phrase that parents are a force multiplier. So tell me about what that means to you.
Well, I guess the equation that pops in my mind is the right practitioners being the first thing, times the parent execution, the parent's ability to execute, that's what equals the results, the faster progress you're looking for. So in that equation, yes, getting the right practitioners, the right guidance, the right information, super important. And again, most people just hire the wrong person who's really not a fit. So the key is really making good decisions there. But all the guidance and advice in the world doesn't help unless you as a parent can implement and put it into action. And that's why, from a practitioner perspective, they're really frustrated because they have these parents who pay thousands of dollars, run the labs, and then from a practitioner perspective, the parent doesn't comply with the guidance or they don't adhere to the plan. So again, it's the parent's ability to discern what to do and then to implement well. That's that's so key in terms of the progress. So I like to phrase it where your child has a trajectory right now, in terms of how they can progress and thrive. And the goal is to increase, to steepen that trajectory so they can progress more into the people they were meant to be. And so, if you want to increase that trajectory, do not miss your piece in this puzzle, in that equation. And again, this is not about, like, parents like you and I early on, we weren't helpless. We knew things, we put things into action. So it's going from wherever you are, which might be a strong place, into an even stronger place where you are making better decisions with more confidence, with less stress and anxiety. And because again, it's so true that it's all about the journey. It's not the destination. And the journey can feel really horrible if we're generating the friction and the heaviness, and all of that is optional.
Yeah, I think that is so true. Ultimately, I think so many parents, they feel the need to delegate any kind of responsibility primarily out of this feeling of overwhelm. Um, and so getting to that place where they feel a little bit more confident in their own ability to choose what's right for them and their family is always going to be one of the most important aspects of all of this. And what I will say too, you mentioned about like the word compliance. I see that in my own practice so often is that people will ask me, what kinds of results do you get? And I said, well, I'm going to be 100% honest. It's a mixed bag, and a lot of that has to do with compliance. If I have a patient who comes to me once or maybe twice, and they say, "Oh, well, we gave the remedies for a week, and then they got sick, and then we didn't know what to do, and we stopped doing the remedies, and then." Grandma came and it's just like all of those things. And I say, okay, well, can we try again? And, ultimately, it really does. And this is in no way meant to, blame or shame parents, by the way. I just want to make it clear that, you know, your child's healing has a lot to do with your ability to follow through on those kinds of treatment protocols and plans. And I think it's so important to be in the right headspace to be able to do that effectively. So again, I think it's very much what you're doing is very much needed in this community.
Oh, I appreciate that. And I love what you just shared. And, again, I think you can even expand it more broadly because if you think about a parent, we're all in a state of fight or flight ourselves when we get that diagnosis. We're all dysregulated to some degree. What I've seen time and time again from these parents, it's not me, it's these parents and their transformation when they get out of fight or flight and they get more regulated and into that more confident, calm version of themselves, that alone, that leap from where the parent was to where they become, even if they don't change what they're doing for the child benefits and makes progress. So the energy of the parent, which I know it's more related to your what you do, the energy of the parent's everything. And if we're dysregulated, our child feeds off that and they don't feel as safe, they don't feel as connected. So if you as a parent change your energy by getting better equipped kicking to the curb, whatever's causing that friction, your child will benefit. And I think from an autism perspective, will the bad behaviors get less? Yes. Will maybe speech start emerging? Those things could happen, but just the dynamic within the family, there'll be more love and connection and more growth if you get into that better state first. So it's almost like the parent showing the child what it's like to get regulated. If that happens first, so much more becomes possible for your child.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, a child will start to get into an anxiety loop kind of behavior, and the parent gets so charged up and they fall right into that. So, I think that's so, so important for parents to keep in mind.
Perfect.
All right, Len. I ask every single one of our guests 8 rapid fire questions. These questions are designed to give us a little bit of insight into who you are and why you do what you do. So, are you ready?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, number one, if you could choose only one natural remedy for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Sunlight, sun exposure.
I like that one. You're not the first to say that. All right, number two, tell us something most people don't know about you.
Ooh, um, well, I was a jazz DJ in college. That's one thing. But otherwise, yeah, no, before I started doing this in the corporate world, I was a CPA initially, then a CFO and a controller working for the big behemoth banks in New York City. So at that time, I started getting away from day-to-day responsibilities more into process improvement work because these banks were so dysfunctional. So I was a Six Sigma master black belt, someone who's really good at re-engineering broken processes. And I'm just taking those skills and I'm focusing on parents, how they operate. So that's something that people probably don't know that's in my history, but very, very useful now with the work I do.
Absolutely. All right. Number three, if I were to compile a playlist of happy music, what song would you suggest be added?
Ooh, what one song?
Yeah.
Wow. And I'm such a huge music buff too. And there's not one that's really coming to mind. I mean, I think what popped into my mind as soon as you asked was uh, Johnny Nash's "I Can See Clearly Now, the Rain Is Gone,"
Mm,
because I just find it to be so uplifting
yeah.
and empowering, and it's just got a groove about it. So I'll go with that one.
Okay. Awesome. It's funny. My sister and I, when we were little, that was like our happy song. So, all right. What is your favorite guilty pleasure?
Whew. I don't know. I've been taking my son, who's 19, like on to many concerts. He loves music. I love music. So I think my guilty pleasure is seeing great live music. Doesn't matter the type, could be classical, could be jazz, but just seeing live music is a guilty pleasure.
Awesome. All right. What is the most influential book you've ever read?
Wow, there's a whole bunch behind me. I'm going to say right now, because it's more current, is Dr. Neil Nathan's latest book, The Sensitive Patient's Healing Guide, which talks all about focusing on that key root cause, a dysregulated nervous system. It's important for
Mhm.
me. It's important for the parents I advise. It's important for our kids. So I'm going to go with that one.
Awesome. All right. What does the word revolution mean to you?
To me, it just means taking a stand and doing what's right, not what's expected. So that to me is what pops into my mind.
And what does the word remedy mean to you?
Yeah, for me, when I hear that term, like I go to biblical times, like it's a balm. It's something that is what your body innately needs. And it could take the form of a homeopathic remedy. It can take the form of a song. It can take the form of human connection. There's lots of things our body is just wired to run off of. And if we're deficient in it, our job is to figure that out and to see if we can give the body what it needs. So I'm a huge fan of this whole thing. Everything we've been talking about is ultimately making decisions that allow the body's natural healing ability to kick in, whether it's for ourselves or for our kids.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. And lastly, if you could impart one piece of wisdom onto our listeners, what would that be?
You're the one. People may not want to hear it. It all comes down to you. And again, this is a once in a lifetime opportunity to respond powerfully. And again, you were chosen for this. I know we talk about being dragged in here. Hey, this is all happening for a reason. We can't understand it, but just surrender to the fact that it comes down to you, and that's a great thing, not a horrible thing. And this is all something that's going to call you to grow in ways that you never imagined. And it's going to feel uncomfortable because it has to feel uncomfortable, but you're being called to do this because you can. So, step into that role and do what you can to, again, get better equipped to make the right call for your child, the right decisions. And again, just know people are going to be pissed off. There are going to be people who aren't approving and being excited for you, and that's okay. Take that as a sign that you're onto something that's right. Just like the inconvenient actions are the ones that will move the needle the most.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so funny because I had won the lottery to have an appointment with the medical medium at one point, and I was so excited about it. And the first thing he said is, "You're going to heal your child." And I asked him for all this advice, and he said, "No, you're the one. You have to do this." And I was so angry. I was so
Yeah.
angry that I had spent all this time waiting for this thing, and I thought he was going to give me, the tablets at the top of the mountain, and I was going to figure it all out. And nope, that was the advice that he gave me. So, I cursed him back then. I thank him now. But anyway, all
But he
right,
was right.
Len. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. All right, Len, where can people learn more about you and find out how to work with you?
Sure. Well, again, I'll just repeat, this journey does take courage, and even reaching out for any kind of support. I know that's a courageous step. So just know that time matters. And, the sooner you get equipped to operate at this level, trust me, the faster your child can benefit. So if it resonates with you, you know, and you're ready to kind of operate at that higher level, which again, there's always a higher level, probably the best way is just to reach out to me directly. So I'm Len at allinparent.com. And that's the website, allinparent.com. So just reach out to me directly. I review everything personally, and basically, I'm honored to be able to offer a strategic clarity call to any parent, and that alone will help you see things more clearly and just give you more momentum. And even one conversation like that can truly change the trajectory for your child. So anyone who wants to have that call, they can just reach out to me directly.
Thank you so much, Len, for being here. Everybody tune into Autism Parenting Secrets if that resonates with you. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you all next time. Take care.
With hope as a guiding light.